Do you think 5 grams is enough?
So you should expect a reduction in percent body fat and overall fat mass. When it gets to cognitive effects, we see that the best benefits are about grams a day. You can take a mega bolus dose and get some acute effects from sleep deprivation, but I don't think even the carnivore would get enough.
Dr. Darren Candow
is a leading expert in muscle health and performance science.
Today, he's breaking down new evidence that reveals the hidden benefits of creatine, helping you get stronger, think clearer, and age better.
As we get older, I think creatine is more essential. So considering why to take creatine, I think it's from muscle performance, from a bone health perspective, and then I think anybody from a brain health perspective does respond well. So that's where the practicality comes into play, and it's actually, to be honest, one of the main reasons I'm taking about 20 grams a day.
And that's safe.
You can take creatine on a daily basis. I mean, I've been taking it for 2 straight decades.
Does creatine damage the kidneys?
So there's a bit of a caveat.
Does it cause hair loss?
No, this is probably the biggest or second biggest myth.
Alzheimer's and dementia, is there any evidence?
It's phenomenally encouraging. It came out this year, and there's a little bit of study last year at the University of Kansas. Now, the question is, what is the best dose? It seems that you do need to do a higher amount.
This is a supplement I'm now using, and it's 10 cents a serve. It is creatine. Now, most people still think that creatine is just a bodybuilding drug, but new research shows it is way more powerful. Creatine can boost brain performance, protect against sleep loss, support fat loss, and even strengthen your bones as you age. But here's the most surprising part. 5 grams of creatine is not enough, especially after 40. Today, I'm joined by the wonderful Dr. Darren Candow. He's one of the world's top researchers on creatine, and he'll explain new science about how much you really need and why creatine might be the most underrated supplement, especially for longevity. So, Dr. Candow, my first question, do you think that most people need creatine as a supplement, or they need more creatine in their diet?
Well, let's start with the diet first. There's really good evidence from enhanced data now suggesting that the minimal amount you want to get is 1 gram. That may not sound like a lot, but what about if you're a vegan, a vegetarian, emphasizing a plant-based diet, or children who are typically very picky eaters? The cost of meat or animal-based proteins is very expensive. So the minimal amount is about 1 gram to maintain optimal health. But when we get into supplementation, the lowest dose that seems to be effective, you could argue 2 grams seems to be the lowest maintenance dose, but that's after you do a really, really high amount. But if you don't want to do the loading phase or a high amount, 3 grams seems to be the minimal amount. So although it's not an essential nutrient because our brain and liver is making it, we often argue it is conditionally essential because you're getting a plethora of potential benefits with a little bit more.
So do you think, so by the way, my audience is primarily meat-based. So consider them to be carnivore, keto, loving meat, and I love meat as well. So consider somebody that loves to eat meat, and they probably eat a lot of red meat.
Right.
Do you think by adding in or upping their creatine that they would markedly feel better?
So about 5 or 10 years ago, we'd likely say probably not. If you're on a carnivore diet and you're getting potentially up to 5 grams per day eating primarily meat, you're definitely getting the muscle benefits. We now know that meat can be broken down, very similar to solution and accumulate in tissues. But since the plethora of new research is now looking at bone, cardiovascular, and especially now brain health, and I'm one of the biggest proponents that more is likely better, I don't think even the carnivore would get enough. I actually think they might need a smaller amount. But the good thing is if you're eating a lot of meat, you do not require hardly any amount from supplementation. Compared to a vegan who's not getting any dietary creatine, they're going to need a lot more emphasis on supplements, yes.
Okay. And when it comes to male versus female, because I have a split audience, 50% male, 50% female, the men might be thinking, oh, I've heard of creatine, bodybuilding supplement. However, is it also important for women to think about this as well?
It's crucially important for females. And I think the stigma went from, it was designed in 1992 when it came popular for males to get bigger, stronger, faster. And a lot of females weren't interested in that. And of course, we know lean tissue mass and strength and performance are the keys for longevity. So there's a plethora of great evidence in the last at least 2 to 3 decades, clearly showing that females across the lifespan from pregnancy, all the way up to old age do benefit. And we focus on postmenopausal females. It has beneficial effects for children and in adolescents. There's some evidence, it's not the greatest, but there's some evidence to suggest that females only produce about, or sorry, don't produce about the same amount of creatine naturally as males. About 20 to 30% is the estimated amount less. So that's why females will likely respond very well to creatine. And when you look at performance, it's really encouraging that if you're a biological female listening, you should expect some gains. And we think lean tissue mass will go up, very small amount, but it will go up. But if you're considering why to take creatine, I think it's from muscle performance. If you're an older female, from a bone health perspective, and then I think anybody from a brain health perspective does respond well. Yeah.
I was particularly interested in this. So when I did my research, I started taking creatine yesterday, actually, because I was like, okay, I'm not going to wait till I talk to you. I'm going to start taking it now. My father passed away from frontal temporal dementia in September, so just 2 months ago. We'll talk about more about the brain stuff, but it's just a plethora of benefits that you can get, even though I do eat a lot of meat. So I do believe that females need to be particularly paying attention to all of this information. It's very important. Now, is 5 grams enough if you want the strength, the bone, the brain, and all the benefits? Do you think 5 grams is enough?
It likely could be, but you would have to supplement for several months. So let's put it into perspective. If you just say, I want skeletal muscle benefits, I think you can go as little as 3 grams a day, and you'll probably get those benefits in as little as a month. The lowest dose ever been shown to have bone benefits, primarily in older males and postmenopausal females, is 8 grams. And the key here is that's in combination with weight training. When it gets to cognitive effects, we see that the best benefits are about 20 grams a day or longer, or 20 grams a day for at least a week. You can take a mega bolus dose and get some acute effects from sleep deprivation. But I will say the lowest dose ever been shown to have brain benefits was 4 grams a day, and that was in people with long COVID, but they had to measure it at 3 months and 6 months. So I think you come to a conundrum, so to speak. It depends on why you're trying to do or what you're trying to achieve. I personally take at least 10 grams a day to get the collective whole body benefits. But, if you have a female say, I don't care about bone or brain, which I don't know anybody who would say that, but if they say, I just want to get stronger, you could go as little as 3 grams a day. But most people nowadays want a whole body benefits, especially brain health. And I take at least 10, if not 20 grams a day. I do spread that out. You don't need to take it all at once. If you're a little nervous of weight gain or water retention, I have this philosophy of microdosing, taking small amounts continuously throughout the day that will maintain the amount in your blood and get taken into the tissue. So, if you had to fly from Dubai to Canada and you're like, I'm going to be super jet lagged, I would encourage you to take 10 to 20 grams for a few days beforehand and then thereafter, because that's when the brain really seems to benefit from enhanced creatine availability. And if you're like, hey, I like to work out and, I'm really susceptible to osteoporosis in my family, I think a higher amount is beneficial. The good news for those watching, there's no adverse health effects on the liver, cardiovascular system, or the renal system. So we consider creatine to be the safest, most effective ergogenic compound you can consume from a human physiology perspective. And great research out of Australia is looking at pregnancy into fetal development. So it used to be for young males wanting to get bigger, stronger, faster. And now it's essentially for everybody that's looking to optimize health.
That's why it's so exciting to have this conversation. Usually we talk about diet, exercise, but creatine is really coming up as so important, especially for those brain benefits. I want to understand creatine before going into these different sections of strength, bone, brain. What is creatine? Is it natural?
It's a natural occurring compound. It's not an anabolic steroid, which is one of the biggest myths. So it's a natural occurring compound that's very similar to an amino acid we get from protein. We are naturally making it into 2 areas of the body, which is actually a limiting factor. It's only made in the liver and as well as the brain. So once it's made, it has obviously in the brain, it likes to stay there for the cognitive effects, but in the liver, it leaves the liver and goes to demanding tissues. Now, for most of us, the demanding tissue is our muscle. And 95% of creatine is stored in skeletal muscle. So that only means 5% would be trickling to other areas such as bone, testes, cardiovascular system. the brain will make its own creatine and it stays trapped there for times of metabolic stress. A university student staying up all night cramming for an exam, your dog woke you up at 3 a.m. to use the bathroom, whatever it is, that's where the brain creatine stores seem to really come into play. But supplementing the diet seems to augment these beneficial effects. What people may not know is that muscle doesn't make creatine. But muscle acts as a vacuum. It will take in all the creatine that's in your bloodstream as much as possible. Whereas the brain is unique. It has the blood-brain barrier. So whatever's made in the brain will likely stay there. And then when it needs help, it will ask the blood for more. And that's why we think to get brain benefits, you need more in circulation.
Okay. If somebody's thinking, well, I don't want to take a supplement just yet, can I prioritize getting it from the diet? What has the most creatine? What proteins has it?
Yeah, there's two that come to mind, red meat or beef, and the fattier the type of fish. So herring, mackerel, salmon, those have the highest concentrations, and beef will as well. Poultry does contain creatine, but at a lot lesser quantity. So if you're eating seafood or red meat 1 or 2 times a day, you're probably getting about 3 additional grams in addition to what you're naturally making. That will likely give some small beneficial effects, but research is suggesting even more will give you greater effects.
Okay, I just had salmon for dinner. That's good. And I had ground beef and I had ground beef for lunch. So,
Right.
and I think that most people are going to have salmon in their rotation of
Right,
diet and then ground beef or steak. So that's
Yes.
awesome. Okay. Creatine versus caffeine from a performance perspective. So imagine you're going to the gym, you want to perform. I'm talking about me a lot, but I quit caffeine 2 weeks ago. So with the addition of creatine, not having the caffeine, can I still get those performance benefits? What's better, creatine or caffeine for performance?
Oh, it's going to be caffeine for performance from a muscle contractile property. They're both very, very viable. So, for example, caffeine is well known to improve maximal strength, power, endurance, and repeated muscle contractions. Creatine is right behind it. It also improves those, but from a magnitude of response, caffeine will give you the effect. Caffeine is a drug effect, where creatine causes the effect from more of a physiological perspective. Now, the question comes up, should you combine the two? Well, there is some research to suggest that if you combine the two molecules, they can't interfere with one another. And this has to do with calcium release from an organelle in our muscle fibers. But it seems to be dose perspective. So this is really important for your listeners, because a lot of people will put their creatine in their coffee or tea and then say, oh, is this okay? The best research comes from Europe, and it clearly shows that if the dose of caffeine powder is 350 milligrams or higher, it can't interfere with the creatine effects on muscle relaxation only. So it doesn't really interfere with muscle growth or bone or anything like that. But from a muscle contractile principle, if your dose of caffeine is 350 milligrams or more continuously on a daily basis, you may, and I use the word may, experience an interference effect. Now, most average coffees, teas are well below 350 milligrams of caffeine. So I think it's totally fine to put it in your coffee or tea and drink it within a few hours. The pharmacokinetics, they don't seem to be interfere with one another. So again, if there is an interference effect, it's likely insignificant in the long term. The good news for those listening is the timing of creatine doesn't really matter, whereas the timing of caffeine certainly does. So if you're a coffee drinker or tea, most people have it as soon as they wake up. I would suggest to do pre-exercise, focus on caffeine. Post-exercise, you can take creatine, you can take it at night or whichever. I personally like to drink at least 5 grams of creatine with essential amino acids in a water bottle during my workout. That's one way I get some creatine. I also put creatine in with my breakfast, and then I consume a small amount later on in the evening. But to consume caffeine post-exercise doesn't really cause any rationale from a performance perspective. Usually caffeine is consumed pre-exercise.
I was hoping that you would say that creatine is not better than caffeine, but I mean, I guess for those people that are sensitive to caffeine, I mean, if you want that potent, powerful effect, like creatine, which we'll talk about now with the workout aspect, is very important when it comes to performance or elongating your length of workout in terms of volume. But the caffeine, yeah. I mean, I quit it and I feel so much better. But anyway, Let's move on from caffeine.
It's interesting you say that because the plethora of health benefits from caffeine are so monumental, and then the antioxidants from a beverage, but there is a limit. Some people get anxiety, they increase neuromuscular transmission, whichever the reason, insomnia, they're excuse me, they're taking it too late in the evening. So it's ideally it's subjective to the individual. I have to limit my caffeine consumption now to about 2 cups of coffee, and then I switch to decaf for the antioxidants throughout the day. But I noticed when I was consuming as an academic 5, 6, 7 cups of coffee, my sleep was fragmented. I was waking up all night. But by decreasing it to early in the day, I found it substantially more positive from a health perspective. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm zero caffeine. So anyway, I'm quite sensitive though, and I think that some people are in that camp of being sensitive. Some people like you, like 1 to 2 cups, totally fine. And caffeine and coffee beans is said to be kind of maybe good for your health. Some people say it's bad, but let's not get there.
Sorry, I guess to go back to yours, where you're caffeine naive now, you're still going to get performance benefits from creatine. So there's the trade-off that you're not going to lose out on. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, creatine for strength. What does creatine do in the body to help with strength?
Well, we've come a long way understanding how this works. So the original theory was that if you had more lean mass or muscle, you would obviously get stronger. And then some good work from blood flow restriction clearly showed they are not completely associated. But if you do accept that the more muscle you have, you will get stronger. That's one of the main mechanisms, because creatine in combination with exercise will obviously increase lean tissue mass. And we think about half of that is muscle. But from a pure muscle performance perspective, there's about 4 mechanisms why we think creatine enhances our ability. The biggest one, and it's the landmark mechanism, is it increases ATP resynthesis. So when you're doing muscle contractions, adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, is used and recycled. Creatine seems to sacrifice itself. It donates a phosphate group to help maintain the energy currency of our cells. So think of your cells having more energy to do more reps, more weight, whichever it is. Secondly, now creatine is touted to be a neurotransmitter. So now it may enable acetylcholine to cross the synaptic barrier and get to your muscle fiber to help contract it quicker. And then third is calcium. Creatine seems to cause calcium recycling to go up. Calcium is crucially needed for muscle contractions to occur. Without it, your muscles would not. And then the fourth is glycogen. We all hear carbohydrates, so creatine really seems to enhance glycogen kinetics. So from a muscle performance perspective, the reason people get stronger, they can do more reps or do more contractions over time from a volume perspective is based on those 4 mechanisms. From a muscle growth, they're totally different, but those are the 4 that primarily come to mind.
Okay, so imagine someone's in the gym and then they're doing strength training. Does it benefit them from an explosive power perspective, or is it in that hypertrophy range when you're past that strength, like past 5 reps? Which one is it, or is it both?
Both. So creatine really enhances the anaerobic alactic system. So this is when it's very difficult. 100-meter sprint, you're really doing a heavy leg press or whichever. Creatine will really come and assist the ability of ATP to be created. And then when you're doing more volume, you're getting into reps 8, 9, 10, and 11, it helps recycle creatine and ATP resynthesis there. So some of the best lines of evidence have suggested that when you're doing multiple sets, for example, bench press, creatine versus placebo may give a very, very minimal benefit on the first set, but sets 2, 3, and 4 is when really creatine comes to aid. So at the end of the day, the person's able to do more volume of work, and then over time, they get those physiological adaptations.
And that's because also it works on the type 2 muscle fibers. Is that correct?
That is correct. The type 2X is primarily what we're looking at. Now, there's a big shift on the hybridization of fibers, but creatine actually can benefit type 1 cross-sectional area or muscle fibers, as well as type 2 as well. So it does look like it influences muscle morphology. And the nice thing is the more type 2 fibers you have, the better off creatine's response likely will be. That's probably why as we get older, I think creatine is more essential, because unfortunately, as we get older, type 2 muscle fibers die off and go away. And therefore, creatine may be more crucially needed for an older population.
Okay. And so now when it comes to the endurance aspect of it, creatine also shines in that aspect.
Yes, it's super exciting and emerging because it used to be a myth. No one ever in there ever thought that creatine could be beneficial for the aerobic type of athletes. And then a couple studies came up in long duration aerobic exercise, ultra marathon, and an Ironman. And when these individuals took the loading phase, or about 20 grams a day for 5 days, it did not really influence the performance of the race, but it certainly improved recovery. So for anybody listening that's in soccer, tennis, swimming, or long duration aerobic exercise, it may improve some instances of ability or coordination, but I think the big thing you would probably expect is recovery. It will allow the body to be less inflamed. It will decrease protein breakdown, and therefore that may allow you to get back and train more often. Could this have applications for the aerobic athletes on track and field who train twice a day? I think it could be. Definitely long duration cardiovascular exercise, which is very catabolic. If you're out there running for 3 or 4 hours, creatine acts as an anti-catabolic agent. It sort of is an anti-inflammatory, so it helps preserve. So if you said, hey, I'm going to go for a 4-hour run today, I think creatine would really come to your rescue the next day, allowing your body to probably be less sore or enable it to recover quicker.
Okay, so if I'm not an endurance athlete, but I do, 10 to 14,000 steps a day, or my audience does more walking, can it also help with that moderate activity as well in terms of the recovery aspect?
Yeah, very minimally. I think if you're at the low end of less than, say, 60% VO2 max, such as walking or brisk walking, you have other energy systems that will come to play there, primarily from the breakdown of fat, protein, and carbohydrate. Creatine is really there for a safety perspective. If you're out walking and then hypothetically a dog comes behind you and you're scared of dogs and you start sprinting, that's where creatine would come into play. But for those that are doing moderate to light intensity exercise, I think it's called zone 2 for in the fitness, creatine would have a minimal, if any, effect. But if you do a sprint class or spin class, that's where it really comes into play. Yeah.
Now, as Dr. Candow mentions, creatine is so important for strength, for sprinting, and so much more. But when we think about our health, what we put on our skin also matters, because chemicals in our skincare, like parabens and phthalates, can actually cause disease. They can disrupt hormones and even lead to things like insulin resistance, because whatever goes in your skin can enter the bloodstream and it can reach your brain, penetrate your cells, potentially causing long-term health issues. And that really made me stop and think, because I've healed so much through a primal lifestyle, but I realized I was still exposing myself to harmful chemicals through my everyday skincare. And that's why we launched the Primal Tallow Balms and Soaps, which is our chemical-free skincare solution. And it's packed full of vitamins A, D, E, and K2. There's no nasties, there's no preservatives, there's no artificial scents. There's just one ingredient: pure grass-fed, grass-finished tallow. And I've been using the unscented soap and tallow balm, and honestly, it has been a game changer for my skin. Both products have improved my skin texture, hydration, and a little goes a long way. Like this tallow balm, I've been using it for the last 2 months already, and I've been using it on my face and body, and it's lasted me a long time. And exciting news, our USA store is now open. So that means faster shipping and cheaper prices. And right now, the Primal's offering up to 30% off store-wide for the next 7 days. So if you want to try our tallow soaps or balms, just head to theprimal.com/discount. There's also a link in the description. Creatine and fat loss. Does it help in any way burn more fat?
It does. We put out 2 meta-analysis, and this is actually a very interesting feat. So if you're 18 and above and you perform exercise, you should expect a very small reduction in percent body fat and overall fat mass. So I think that's a big stigma. A lot of people refrain from high-dose creatine because they say, oh, the number on the scale went up in the first week. That's typically just water retention and until your body does acclimatize. And I think, we're looking at GLPs or obesity or metabolic syndrome. Could creatine be added in the toolbox? I think it should be at least considered with exercise. So from a mechanistic standpoint, in rodent models, it actually increases energy expenditure, it increases thermogenesis, and there's a few good lines of evidence that it stimulates mitochondrial biogenesis. So if we all remember even back to high school, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, but it's the only part of the cell that goes through the Krebs cycle or oxidizes fat. So I think in combination with exercise, creatine could have some small but yet favorable effects. Creatine by itself likely won't have any effects.
So, what if somebody is just sedentary? They're thinking about, I eat a lot of meat, I want to be healthier, but they don't exercise in terms of that explosive, high intensity exercise. Does creatine have any benefit for that population?
Very unlikely unless they're going through disuse atrophy rehabilitation or they have a medical condition. Very unlikely creatine would. You could argue, because there is evidence out there, that it could have some brain benefits from a cognitive or memory perspective. Most of those studies were in combination with physical activity. But if someone, is waiting for ACL surgery or an older individual in a nursing home, creatine might have some small beneficial effects. But from the average healthy individual sitting on the couch watching Netflix, unfortunately, it's not going to have any effects. Yeah.
Well, it makes sense because it's in combination with exercise and it's that resistance training, putting load on the body in explosive movement or something that has higher intensity where creatine is really going to shine from that ATP mitochondrial perspective. For strength, what is the dose that somebody needs to take just for strength?
You can do as little as 3 grams a day, and that will accumulate over time. Overall, most people probably take 5 grams a day, and I think that's a very viable dose and strategy that will definitely give you muscle performance benefits. So the nice thing is, from a strength or performance, that's the area that you can usually take the lowest dose and get benefits. But then if you say, okay, strength, muscle mass, now I want to move into bone or brain, you might need a bit more. But anybody listening, and if they're wanting to start with 3 grams a day, I think strength improvements or muscle performance improvements is likely the first thing you will notice. Yeah. And that can happen in as little as probably a month at 3 grams. If you want to do the loading phase, which is 20 grams a day for about 5 or 7 days, you can get benefits in as little as 3 days.
Okay, I'll talk about the dosing a little bit later. Let's move on to brain. How does creatine help with the brain? This is emerging new research.
Yeah. So the brain does make its own creatine, and that's a good thing. It has a blood-brain barrier, so it likes to be very preventative and maintain the existence of the human body. And so if you're not metabolically stressed, you got great sleep, you're exercising, you feel great, likely creatine is not going to have any benefits. But I don't know anybody on the planet who doesn't go through acute metabolic stressors. Your dog got up, you're stressed with work, the commute to traffic, transcontinental flight. This is happening to people on a daily basis. So what we think is the creatine has a reservoir, the brain has a reservoir of creatine, but during times of metabolic stress, and if they're now becoming a chronic, such as traumatic brain injury, Alzheimer's disease, sleep deprivation, the brain says, I need help. And the best lines of evidence for the efficacy of creatine on brain is during times of metabolic stress. Maybe the brain is not making enough creatine and it taps into what's in circulation. So to put it in perspective, the individual says, I feel fine. I get 8 hours of sleep a night. I exercise. If you're taking creatine, you're likely not going to notice any benefits. If you're older adults, you may, from a memory or cognitive perspective, but everybody else on the planet that goes through these stressors, they may benefit from a higher dose. Now, the question is, what is the best dose? It seems that you do need to do a higher amount. 10 to 20 grams is in the ballpark where we think from a cognitive perspective. If you're willing to try that, you can already check off the box for bone and muscle and cardiovascular benefits, because now you're looking at it from a whole body perspective.
Okay, so let's break it down, the benefits. There is benefits with regard to depression and anxiety. Is that along with using an SSRI?
It is in both circumstances and cognitive behavior therapy, but I'm really happy to talk about the dose in these studies. So these individuals were clinically monitored. They used MRS, or sort of like an MRI for the brain, to look at brain imaging. And in these studies, they actually only used 5 grams a day, but this was for several months. So if you have clinical depression, anxiety, even PTSD would fall into that realm, make sure you talk to your medical practitioner about the adjunct of creatine to your standard medication. No study has ever shown that creatine by itself will replace medication, and I'm not a medical doctor, and I'm certainly not saying that. But the great group out of Utah, they're a group of psychiatrists that are world-renowned for creatine's potential adjunct for clinical depression. And they've clearly shown as little as 5 grams in addition to SSRIs or methamphetamines, depending on the treatment, can increase brain creatine levels, which has to be there first. And then it's actually been shown to have an improvements in self-efficacy. And that also leads to other studies on improvements in memory and cognition. So you don't need the super high dose. It goes back to the start of our talk today. If you only took 3 to 5 grams, I'm confident that over months you would get the benefits. Some people are not patient enough to wait the few months. They want to take a little bit more. So I think you have the option of whatever you're trying to achieve. Yeah.
I think most people are not patient with most things, but I think if they want to do 10 to 20 grams. Okay, so that's depression and anxiety. What I was hoping for is like Alzheimer's and dementia. Is there any evidence?
It's phenomenally encouraging. It came out this year, and there's a little bit of study last year at the University of Kansas. Aaron Smith was the main author there, and it was quite remarkable. When you look at the catastrophic diseases of the world, you have the cancer, cardiovascular disease, but the neurological ones are right up there, and especially Alzheimer's. They gave 20 grams a day for 8 straight weeks. So they didn't take a break. And the remarkable thing here is in a population diagnosed with brain atrophy and dysfunction, not only did 20 grams a day increase brain creatine levels, it also improved memory and cognition into a condition that's characterized by those hallmark traits of catastrophe, if you will. So it was really encouraging. It was a small sample size, but what it clearly showed is that a high dose can get into a clinical population's brain and cause some really beneficial effects. So, what I would tell people if they have a history or genetic history of dementias, vascular dementia or Alzheimer's, it's something to at least talk to your doctor about. No adverse effects, so certainly not going to hurt. If anything, the upside is there. And it's probably why when you piggyback on head trauma and concussion, a common denominator is that brain creatine levels are reduced. And so maybe supplementation is not only bringing those levels back up to baseline, but elevating it for during times of metabolic stress. It's actually, to be honest, one of the main reasons I'm probably taking about 20 grams a day. I do not have a history of Alzheimer's or dementia, but looking at the research, I'm just thinking, why wouldn't I take a little bit more when there's no risk to potentially have all the upside?
So if you're just starting, you wouldn't just start with 20 grams. You would you would slowly go up. Is that correct? Like I wouldn't do 20 grams tomorrow.
Yeah, you could. Now, the only thing you would expect is probably a little bit of water retention. Some people will complain about GI tract irritation, things like that. So I think if with my individuals, if they say I'm willing to take a higher amount, how would I go about? I say start with 3 to 5 grams a day, maybe for the first couple of weeks, see how you feel, and then slowly work your way up there. There's been studies though where people have volunteered for one day to take 30 grams a day, no adverse effects. But do we know the adverse effects over long periods of time? There's been some long studies in Parkinson's disease, which are very encouraging. But you could definitely try a 20-gram dose tomorrow. That's the loading phase. No reason to suggest otherwise. But if you're thinking of it from a lifelong perspective, you can start as little as 3 grams a day and work your way up.
Okay, that's very promising. I love that. Okay, next one is for folks that are dealing with sleep deprivation or sleep loss. There was a study in Germany, 25 grams. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, there's that study, and then there was a few others that use a lot lower dose. And the best lines of evidence from a cognitive perspective are in those sleep deprived. So the study you alluded to is a landmark study, a very elegant design out of Germany, where they actually had young males volunteer to go through 21 hours of sleep deprivation. And they use very sophisticated imaging, this magnetic resonance spectroscopy, to look at the different levels of creatine accumulation in the brain. And so unlike all other studies, they gave a bolus superdose, about 30 grams, and then they measured the ability to maintain memory, cognition, and self-efficacy during those 21 hours of sleep deprivation. And the results were very encouraging. Not only did creatine elevate the brain, it maintained cognition. So I try to put it into practical terms. Jet lag, university students staying up all night. Could creatine allow you to score better on your tests? Could creatine reduce the fogginess when you get off the plane in Germany after an 11-hour flight? That's where the practicality comes into play, and it's likely there. I've certainly noticed a huge decrease in jet lag when I take higher dose creatine. That's just me, and I've heard this from others. Now, there's a bit of a caveat. Creatine is the biggest methyl scavenger in the body. So there is a number of individuals who say when they take creatine late in the evening, they have insomnia or it keeps waking them up. If that is someone like you, I would suggest to take creatine earlier in the day, because if creatine is the biggest methyl scavenger, when you take a super high dose, that could lead to an increase in neurotransmitters and epinephrine. So that might cause some of the anxiety or jitteriness. Also recommend take creatine with food if you're susceptible to those symptoms. Yeah.
Okay, this is very exciting. So with all the things that you're saying, why doesn't everyone take creatine? Like, why aren't more people talking about this?
Yeah, I think we're just getting on the cusp of getting evidence-based research out there. It's very difficult to get the medical community on board with creatine because they think creatine is very similar to creatinine, and they only know that creatinine is an estimated or a false indicator of kidney impairment. So I think a lot of people, when they say I'm taking creatine, make sure you talk to your doctor because that's going to be a false positive when it comes to kidney function. The other big thing is the stigma. Creatine was designed to get young males bigger, stronger, faster, and we've come a long way, but we just need to do more podcasts like this. We need to get more evidence out there that it's not a steroid. It's not going to make you super big and bulky. It has some health benefits if done a proper way. Also, toning down the expectations. I think a lot of people think creatine is a miracle. No, you still need to do exercise. It can augment some of those effects, but it's not very large. It's very similar to protein. Protein will give you small benefits, but these are not anabolic steroid-like effects. Exercise is definitely the main driver, but I think we're on the cusp of getting more awareness out there. But 10 years ago, there was no podcast, there was no social media. We had to rely on just, reading a journal article in a library, and most people don't have access to that. So I think a huge benefit of social media and platforms is getting evidence-based information out there. Yeah.
Okay. So continuing with the brain, so TBIs, it also helps with traumatic brain injury, concussions, anything of that nature?
It's there. The theory is definitely there, but the only study was in children in Scotland where they gave 0.4 grams per kilogram, so a very, very high dose to children who immediately suffered head trauma, and then they were randomized, obviously, to creatine or no treatment for up to 6 months. There was no brain imaging assessed, but they did look at improvements in self-care, self-efficacy, and creatine seemed to improve that as well. In the animal model, it's more encouraging. In mice and rats, when creatine was given before or immediately after head trauma, it decreased inflammation and incidences of concussion or head trauma recovery. So at the end of the day, there's a lot of potential. We need a randomized control trial, usually a multi-site, suggesting that creatine can have beneficial effects. I don't see any reason why someone in head contact sports would not take creatine based on these potentials. Could the athlete recover quicker from head trauma? That's the million-dollar question. We think they can, but until it's been shown in humans, it's still speculation. But that's our hope, and I think that will be a huge focal point moving forward. At the next World Cup, could Cristiano Ronaldo have more cognitive function during the last 10 minutes of the gold medal match? We don't know, but the theory is there. So now I'm starting to see a lot of athletes not ask it about it for muscle, but for more of the cognitive effects. When, I've pictured Tiger Woods at the Masters, the focus he would have had when everything's riding on it. Those are elite athletes, but could creatine help in certain ways? Yeah.
Okay. So dose for brain, the umbrella of brain, how much should people take for brain health?
So when you look at everybody lumped into one, including those with disease such as COVID-19, Alzheimer's, I think the lowest dose shown to increase brain levels and then have benefits is 4 grams a day, but you need to take that for several months. If you're looking for more of an acute effect, I immediately suffered a concussion. I have a big match coming up. I know I'm going to fly around transcontinental airlines. You could take 20 grams up to 30 and expect quicker benefits that way.
And that's safe.
No adverse effects yet. Now, that's a really good question because to measure adverse effects on the liver and kidney is easier. Is there any detrimental effects on brain swelling or osmosis that way? We don't think so. There's been none reported, but 4 to 30 grams seems to be the range. It's a very wide range for the cognitive effects right now. Yeah.
Now, as Dr. Candow mentions, creatine is so beneficial when it comes to the brain, enhancing cognition and even helping with dementia. But no matter what supplement you take, whatever you eat is a foundation of your health. And for me, Personally, going carnivore is what fixed my health conditions, things like low thyroid, anxiety, depression, and even my OCD. But when I started, I was alone. My family and friends were not doing it. And that's why I created an online private community. It's called Go Carnivore, where you can get support from me and ask all of your questions to our carnivore doctors every week. Like, how much protein should I be eating? How much fat? What about iodine on carnivore? You'll also get lots of free meal plans and access to our fat loss challenges. And this is where our members get the best results, because carnivore seems very simple and easy. But if you want 3 times faster results, guided support will help you get to your goals faster. So if you want to try carnivore and heal and lose weight, go to gocarnivore.com and try your free 14-day challenge. Because creatine works, it helps with the immune system. Is it plausible that it could have some anti-cancer benefits?
That's a big area right now. We put out a paper a few months ago looking at all the evidence looking at cancer and creatine. So there was a paper looking at a super physiological dose in animals, a dose that would basically be unheard of in humans, and it seemed to increase the metastasis of cancer cells in the animal model. But when you look at all the human trials and including other animal models, creatine has anti-cancer properties. It's anti-inflammatory. It decreases not only tumor growth, but it actually enhances immune system response, and it's now being used in cancer rehabilitation. So collectively in humans, there's no evidence that at recommended dosages, creatine causes or promotes cancer. If anything, it has anti-cancer properties, likely based on some of the mechanisms where it's anti-inflammatory and it reduces something called reactive oxidative species, or it's kind of like inflammation in our body, which allows us to recover quicker, not only for cancer, but could have applications for cachexia, people with AIDS. I think it has, any type of autoimmune or immune system response. I think creatine could be at least considered. And for those who have those conditions, please talk to your medical practitioner.
Okay. Big problem that people talk about these days, insulin resistance. Can creatine help with insulin resistance?
It's quite interesting that the great group from Brazil, who are one of the leading labs on creatine research, they've done a few studies now in type 2 diabetes, and it actually showed that creatine will cause sort of the doorway to your muscle to open. So that's what we want, and therefore more glucose and insulin receptors combine. So it actually improves GLUT4 translocation. It actually will decrease blood glucose and improve glucose disposal. So yes, for type 2 diabetes, it has applications. And I think for anybody with obesity or metabolic syndrome, that's why creatine could be considered in the treatment there. So yes, it's very promising. Yeah.
And so for the cancer and the insulin resistance, do you have to do exercise for that benefit with creatine?
You likely do. I think by taking creatine, it's not going to stimulate those doorways or transporters that allow glucose and, of course, creatine to bind into the cell. So exercise seems to be the signal. And when you do more exercise, essentially in the body, everything benefits, and then creatine can help speed up some of those benefits. Yeah.
Yeah, because it sounds like miraculous, but I think people have to understand that you have to do intense exercise, and that's going to spur on all these benefits, whether it's strength, bone, which we'll talk about, brain, insulin, getting into the cell. But you do need to do that exercise. So if someone's sedentary, don't be sedentary. Get on and get exercising. It's really important. Bone. What is this connection between creatine and bone? That's exciting.
Yeah, we were very fortunate to sort of publish a few randomized control trials, and they're the longest ones to date looking at creatine plus exercise, as you mentioned. So in the first study we looked at was 1 year in postmenopausal females, and they just did weight-bearing exercise, supervised, and that was shown about 0.1 gram per kilogram. So this dose was a bit higher than muscle, about 8 to 9 grams for the average female. And the interesting thing here is that the group on creatine experienced a reduction in bone mineral density loss in the hip compared to a greater reduction in those on placebo. So although there wasn't an increase, because that would have essentially, cure osteoporosis, all it showed was that creatine had anti-catabolic benefits to bone. Now, this is really crucial because around the hip region, if you fall and fracture your hip, you could be on the waiting list for hip replacement surgery, and then you're physically inactive for about a year. So by decreasing bone mineral density loss in that area, we think it has applications for future falls, fractures, or the development of osteoporosis. we took it a step further because, well, we're now thinking, well, what if they did another year of exercise and we even increased the dose of creatine more? And so in the longest study, we did 2 years of exercise, including 150 minutes of walking. But now we gave an even higher dose for bones, 0.14 grams. So that actually worked out to be about 12 grams a day for 2 consecutive years. And in this study, it was very interesting in postmenopausal females. The females on creatine experienced a greater maintenance or slight increase in bone strength and structure. So collectively, females, especially postmenopausal, experience a reduction in bone mineral density and or preservation of bone strength compared to females that were on placebo. When we turn to males, we do see an increase in lower limb bone area in combination with creatine. So the results are there. They're not that great. It'll certainly never offset bisphosphonates, medications, or osteoporosis. But I think for those that have a family history of bone diseases, it is something to consider. A lot of other studies do not show any bone benefits, but I think it's based on the methodology. To get significant effects with bone, it usually takes a long time with fancy imaging technology, and the dose needs to be there. So the group out of Brazil have done a few studies as well, but they only gave 1 and 3 grams of creatine a day to postmenopausal females with no exercise. And they did this again up for 2 years and they found no effects. So just like you said, exercise has to be there first, and then a higher dose of creatine can cause some small but yet favorable bone benefits.
So from a perspective, just to understand bigger picture around bone, maybe I should have asked this first. Why should somebody, especially if they're 40 plus, care about their bones as we age, male and female as well?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the age. Same with muscle, where we go through sarcopenia and more of a prevalence for bone-related disuse or atrophy. So unfortunately, females are slightly at a higher percent, about 25% over the age of 50, and males are about 20. They're more prone to osteopenia and then, of course, osteoporosis. If you have a family history, you're at a greater prevalence there as well. So unfortunately, weaker bones lead to greater fractures later on in life, and that leads to premature mortality. So obviously focusing on muscle is crucial, but also keep in the back of your mind, the more muscle you have, that's going to cause more strain on bone, which is beneficial. So for those who perform weight-bearing exercise, give yourself another high five, because you're not only improving muscle health, you're likely improving bone health as well.
But that's why also explosive training, jump training, some impact training, because when you have some pressure against the joints and then the bones, that's very important to actually keep them strong. Where it pairs in with obviously having enough protein, but then also creatine,
Right.
It also helps with that bone mineral density, which is the health of your bones, making sure that they're really strong. Because, I think as we age, things just get crappy and you just want to maintain it as much as possible. At least I see that with the people that are older in my family. And again, referencing my dad, when, his decline was very fast. And if you just don't do things for your own self and your own health, your life can just go in a blink of an eye because your body's just not strong.
Yeah, you have to move. Our bodies was meant to move. And I always use, when I use the analogy of making a cake, exercise is the foundation of the cake. And you make a good point, swimming, light walking, that's not going to have big bone benefits. You need these vector forces. The variety of forces and the load are crucial for bone density. And I think for those watching that don't perform any weight-bearing exercise, please start or at least consider it. It doesn't have to be vast. You can do rubber tubing, you can do plyometrics, box jump, whichever it is. You need some load to the body for the muscle and or bone to respond. And that's a really good point. Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about, so the last one was cardiovascular benefits, like vascular benefits. What is that about in creatine?
It's new because we never thought creatine would have any cardiovascular benefits, but it really seems to sort of improve the vascularity or the environment of the arteries and veins, so endothelial health and vasodilation. So we think now it has huge applications for those in cardiac rehab or those that are prone to heart disease. Could creatine be an essential nutrient in the toolbox of a treatment for that overall? And cardiac muscle uses creatine very similarly to skeletal muscle, but we're now looking at it from a preservation perspective. Creatine doesn't really improve absolute VO2 max, but it can have other benefits, primarily from oxygen uptake or using the mitochondria there for energy efficiency. Yeah.
Okay, so we talk about all the benefits. Let's talk about the brand. Like, what creatine do we need to take? Someone's going to say, well, okay, that's great. Well, Dr. Candow, what do I take?
Yeah, there's a lot marketed. There's a lot of fancy imaging. There's a lot of hype. But for your viewers, at the end of the day, stay with the original creatine monohydrate. And from the entirety of my podcast today, when I say creatine, I was referring to monohydrate. It's the one that was originally invented. It's been shown time and time again, over 1,000 papers, to be safe and effective. There are other forms of creatine with weaker evidence for efficacy, but at the end of the day, creatine monohydrate's bioavailability is near 100%. It's by far the safest, and not even close. It's by far the most effective from a muscle, bone, and brain perspective. There's new areas that we're trying to emerge to get creatine quicker into the brain, and that's from a different perspective. But overall, if someone's thinking of supplements, or they are, make sure it's monohydrate. I personally rely heavily on powder. But now the new gummy line out there, if it's a viable source of creatine, seems to be convenient. But I love how, each conference is coming up with new technology. Can we get creatine in beverages that would be really easy for people to consume? So I'm really excited about where the future's going. But at the end of the day, it has to be a source of creatine. And by far, when you look at the evidence, it's monohydrate.
Okay. What about this hydrochloride, creatine hydrochloride? Is that good?
I would put that in the minimal to moderate effectiveness. We don't know the safety, and from an efficacy standpoint, there's been a few studies suggesting it can get into the body, but it's never been shown to be superior to monohydrate.
Okay, so let's go with the monohydrate. So let's talk about dosing. Now, people are going to ask, do I have to do the loading phase, or can I just skip it?
You can totally skip it. Now, the loading phase is the most rapid way to fully saturate your muscle quickly. So I think of world championship athletes, a big event coming up, whatever it is. Those are the individuals where the loading phase would benefit them. And then they can reduce it down to as little as 2 to 3 grams a day thereafter. If you don't want to have any of the potential issues with the loading phase, start as little as 3 grams a day. Take that for about 2 to 4 weeks, and then slightly increase the amounts if you want to gradually get into it. So you definitely don't need to do loading phase. You certainly don't need to cycle it. You can take creatine on a daily basis. It won't have any adverse effects.
How do you avoid the weight gain at all? Can you expect them to gain weight on the scale? Because I think they're going to say, like Dr. Candow, I don't want to gain weight.
Yeah, they typically will during the first week if they do it with a very, very, very high dose. So let's put it in perspective. If you did a 6-week study of creatine, people may only experience about 0.8 kilogram increase over 6 weeks. So really, it washes itself out. But in our experience, if you give a high dose in the first week, a lot of females don't like it, especially because they say, I feel bloated. We're not taking in consideration fluctuations with the menstrual cycle, but they say my clothes feels tighter. I feel bloated if you're taking a high dose. But when you substantially reduce it, or here's the key, take smaller amounts more frequently, that doesn't seem to cause that bloating or GI issues. So I usually recommend no loading phase unless it's from an experimental study. Start with small amounts throughout the day.
Okay. So if I take, for example, someone takes 3 grams to start off with, 1.5 grams split into 2, morning and maybe afternoon. Is that okay?
That's totally fine. And you'll get 0 weight gain and water retention. Yep.
Good. Okay. Take it with food. Is that right?
I personally like to take it with food because you get the benefits of the protein or carbohydrate in with creatine. And there's good evidence to suggest that when creatine is combined with carbohydrate and or protein, you can get some synergistic effects there. Also, it doesn't seem to disrupt or cause any anxiety or jitteriness when you take it with food. And the third thing, it's easily from a consistency. I usually have a high Greek yogurt protein breakfast. 5 or 10 grams of creatine goes in there immediately. So I don't have to worry about it the rest of the day. Again, I drink 5 grams with essential amino acids during my workout. So that's up to 15 grams. And then I have a few of those gummies later on. So I'm about 20 grams a day. I mean, I've been taking it for 2 straight decades. But that's just me.
Wow.
Again, people don't need to take it on a daily basis. Yeah.
You've been taking it for 20 years?
Yep. I'm 48. Probably longer than that. I've been taking it since I've been 17. Yep.
As a bodybuilding supplement, or because you knew all the benefits?
Primarily just from a muscle benefit, and then in the last decade with bone and all that. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Well, aren't you lucky with all these benefits that's happening in your brain and all of the body?
Yes.
Okay. What can somebody expect when they first take it in their first week? Anything changing for them?
I think the dose will dictate the change. So let's say if you just take 3 grams, you're not going to notice likely any benefits at that time point. After a few weeks, you'll notice maybe you can squeeze in 1 or 2 more reps. Your recovery might go up. But if you start with a higher dose, not only will you experience muscle benefits quicker, you're likely going to get those cognitive clarity benefits a little bit quicker as well. So it really comes down to what the dose is and what someone's trying to achieve. Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about some myths. Does creatine damage the kidneys?
No, this is probably the biggest or second biggest myth. Rick Kreider just put out the biggest study this year, looking at over 25,000 instances of people taking creatine versus placebo. No greater adverse effects on the renal system, also on the liver or cardiovascular system as well. So since we're naturally producing it, it's easily excreted. And if the body's not liking it, that's why it's likely safe. Yeah.
And it does increase the creatinine level, so the person should tell your doctor that I'm taking creatine, because the doctor might think you've got some kidney damage.
That's right. So when creatine enters your tissue, it doesn't get released as creatine. It gets released as something called creatinine. And creatinine is used to estimate kidney function. You'll notice on your blood requisition form, it'll say creatinine, and right below it, they'll check off eGFR. So high creatinine in the blood usually indicates that your filtration is low, and that could be a false positive for kidney function. Please tell your doctor that you're taking creatine, so your creatinine should be high and your eGFR should be low. Yeah.
Okay. Creatine and hair loss. Does it cause hair loss?
Well, for those who can see me or not, I was going bald well before I started taking creatine. The ironic thing is about 5 other good researchers in this field are bald as well. So that myth came from the South African rugby study, and they simply measured DHT, and it did go up within physiological range, but it did go up with a very high dose of creatine. So we got inundated in the last decade with daily questions, does creatine cause baldness? And we could only answer, we don't know. All we know is that this hormone went up. The study didn't measure anything until last year when a group of researchers finally put it to the test. They gave 5 grams of creatine. I believe it was for 6 to 8 weeks in young males. And luckily, creatine had no effect on hormones involved in hair thinning, but they actually took it a step further. Cross-sectional area, hair follicle number, it did not cause any detrimental effects. So I have to blame the baldness on my mother's maternal side. But it is a logical, when people see me and, you're out there promoting or talking about creatine, people say, well, you're bald, so it must happen. But there's a lot of other people who take creatine and it doesn't cause it. Yeah.
That must be so annoying for you that you must think that people make that association with you.
My students ask it all the time, and it's got to a point where it's very humorous because a lot of people on podcasts who typically do these often are bald, and their creatines, they're talking about it. So it is interesting, but no, that's like, correlation is not causation, but it's the biggest myth or the second right next to the kidney function. Yeah.
Well, listen, I have like really thick hair, so I started taking creatine. If I get bald,
you can blame me.
Dr. Candow.
You can blame me, yes. Blame me, yeah.
I'm going to blame you.
Yes.
Okay. Increase in blood pressure. Is there any such thing?
It's an important question because creatine is osmotic. It can cause fluctuations in the fluid from an extracellular and intracellular space. So anybody with diagnosed hypertension, if they're on ACE inhibitors or whichever it is, please talk to your doctor. But the good news is the collective body of evidence indicates that there's no adverse effects to hypertension or those with blood pressure issues.
Okay. Cramping. Does it cause cramping?
No, I don't know where this myth came from. My guess is it might have come from the loading phase. It actually does the opposite. Now, I will preface this. We do get an increased incidence of muscle cramping or strains during intense exercise in combination with creatine, but creatine directly does not cause any greater muscle cramping or strains compared to placebo. We actually think it hyperhydrates the muscle, so this could decrease the risk of cramping in hot environments. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay. Use in children and pregnancy. Is that safe, and should it be used with kids?
So overall, I'm going to use the word safe, but there's a caveat. So let's start with children. The best lines of evidence of the current body of literature suggest no adverse health effects from as little as 3 grams all the way up to 8. It has improvements in sport, agility, and self-efficacy. We talked about the concussion study. There hasn't been a study looking at kidney and liver or blood biomarkers. They're currently doing that now in the United States. But all the review articles out there on creatine suggest it's safe and effective at low dosages, which is great. When we get into pregnancy, it's very encouraging and quite surprising to me. I never thought that would be a population where we talk about a typical bodybuilding supplement as the Stigma. But Stacey Ellery out of Australia is the world's leader from pregnancy, transferring the fetal development into birth. And she's used a sheep and mouse model showing that during pregnancy, where brain and bioenergetic demand has substantially gone up, creatine has a plethora of benefits in the animal model. And now she's currently doing a randomized control trial in mothers. And now we're starting to look at the potential for an improvement in fetal development in the placenta and during birth. So it's an area to really stay focused on. For anybody watching that's thinking of getting pregnant, are pregnant, please talk to your doctor and make sure creatine's right for you. I'm not a medical practitioner, but as it currently stands, if you want to search Stacey Ellery's name, it comes up with some really good argues on the potential of creatine for reproductive health. Yeah.
Amazing. Do you have any success stories that you could think of somebody that took creatine and you're like, wow, this happened?
We get it all the time, primarily from an older population when you measure, body composition changes or performance. But then when you measure functionality, sit to stand or walking a little bit easier, a lot of people say they feel way better about themselves. They can perform activities around the house easier, like maybe carrying groceries, or they could pick up their grandchildren a little bit easier. So we often hear that with the older population. We've known this for decades in the younger population when they say, I got stronger in the weight room, I perform more reps. But I think it's those outside the weight room or gym when you start to hear these lifestyle benefits. And that's probably why it's so encouraging for creatine from across the global lifespan or health span, having some benefits from pregnancy all the way up to being a centenarian, if you will. Yeah.
Amazing. Anything that we missed in this conversation about creatine that you want people to know?
Yeah, we talked about the timing is irrelevant per se, but if I did encourage people to focus on one time, it would be in close proximity to exercise. I think if you take creatine before, during, or right after, that's a great time to sort of refuel that energy system. And the other big thing is I think, creatine has promise, the effects are there, but I think people may need to tone down their expectations because they're not probably as large as they think. And it's not testosterone. It's not an anabolic steroid. It's not going to cause anabolic steroid effects, but people think if they take creatine, that's all they have to do. Yeah.
Who on earth would think that? Okay. Dr. Candow, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to leave all your links in the show notes so people can check you out. You've been amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining me today's episode with Dr. Darren Candow. If you love this episode, check out this one with Dr. Louisa Nicola. It is all about creatine and brain performance, how to prevent Alzheimer's and dementia. Most importantly, the exercise protocol for men and for women. Finally, thank you for your interest in root cause healing, and I'll see you next week.